Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for CED's second economic report of 2021. This one focused on getting back to work. Certainly, we've been through a lot over the course of the last 18 months, and we want to start talking about what it's going to take to get going again, to meaningfully see people going back to work. And we've got some great people in the room to help us talk about that. We have Dr. Daniel Sullivan. Dr. Sullivan joins us from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and will give us an overview of the labor market at a national level. Caroline Portlock, the director of the Workforce Investment Board of Will County. Caroline will give us an overview of some local programs and ways they can assist. And of course, I will talk a little bit about some of our local resources and what we're seeing in market in Will County today. Caroline, Dr. Sullivan, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to hearing from you. Just as a brief starter, I just want to comment a little bit about the Center for Economic Development. For those of you who don't know us, the CED is a nonprofit, public-private partnership economic development corporation celebrating our 40th anniversary. In this industry, that is a really long time, and we're very proud of having been around and serving this community for 40 years. Our mission is pretty simple. We work to improve the quality of life for Will County residents by recruiting new companies and helping existing companies grow here in the county with the ultimate target of adding investment and jobs in the county. Our services to business, all of these are free to businesses either planning to locate here in Will County or looking to grow here. Real estate information, economic data and research, certainly market and labor force information, which is our topic of the day today, business incentives, project guidance, government affairs, and here lately, a lot of work around infrastructure development. And any of you who travel around Will County know there are a lot of projects underway here in the county and certainly more to go as our infrastructure continues to grow to meet our business and residential base. Our CED investors continue to be real supporters of the Center for Economic Development and advocates for the community. We have nearly 200 investors, leaders from business and government throughout the region. And certainly our investors participate with the CED, help lead us, guide us, and shape the future economy of Will County. We have several different committees and coalitions on which our investors are able to participate. And if you are interested in learning more about the CED or becoming a CED investor, please reach out to Julie Wilkinson in our office. Her information is here and will be included in the slide deck. Julie has been fantastic in her role with us and certainly the most pleasant of us. There's a reason why we sent her out. And if you talk to her soon, you might want to let her know happy birthday. Today is Julie's birthday. So happy birthday to Julie. So speaking of our investors, our partners, we have one of our great partners with us here today, Sean McCarthy. Sean McCarthy joins us from Comcast, where he is the regional vice president. Comcast is such an important partner for us in the economic development space. Certainly when we talk about connecting businesses and people within Will County, they've been fantastic for us. And certainly, Sean, we thank you for your support of the CED and would invite you to say a few words.
Thank you, Doug. We're excited to be here virtually. We have some great speakers today, and Comcast is proud to sponsor this event, and we're proud to be an investor with the Will County CED. These types of events are especially valuable right now, given where we are with the pandemic. We all need to connect and stay in sync to make sure Will County is well positioned to move forward. I'm really proud of our company. When the pandemic began last year, internet usage spiked over 30%, and we were ready. Typically, internet doubles every 2 years or so, but because Comcast looks so far out, we already had plans in place to increase capacity to meet demand, and we did it, and our network performed beautifully over the last year and a half. Now we're focused on the future, and what would the world look like from the remainder of the pandemic and beyond? Like all of you on this call, we're asking, What's the future of the workspace? Remote, hybrid, office. What things did we start to do more of at home that will continue? Movies, entertainment, learning, education, healthcare. Will touchless technologies be the norm, and how will all of this impact amenities in the office and residential communities? Whatever the future is, we know connectivity and technology will play a huge important role in economic development. I'd like to thank the CED for all the great work they do. As Doug mentioned earlier, they educate on our behalf, advocate, and promote economic growth within Will County. Economic development begins at the local level, and there's no better organization than the CED. So for those on this meeting who aren't familiar with the organization or aren't members, I'd like to say, listen and learn today, and let's get involved tomorrow. And together, let's help increase the quality of life for all residents in Will County. Thanks so much. Doug, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Sean, and I definitely appreciate those kind words as I sit here on a webinar from my home on a Comcast connection. I think more than ever, we've come to appreciate what you do for us at home and at work, and definitely appreciate you joining us today. So thank you so much for that. With that, I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Dan Sullivan from the Federal Reserve Bank today. Dr. Sullivan is a true expert in labor economics and has been incredibly informative to us, and I think has a lot of great things to say to help educate us about what's happening with the labor force at a national level. Dr. Sullivan, I thank you so much for your input today and for taking the time to talk with us. And with that, I will turn it over to you and let you go ahead and begin.
Excellent. Very glad to be here virtually. It'd be better to be in person. But can you tell me, is my screen showing, or what's the?
Looks great.
Okay, so we got the presentation up good. So thanks very much. Yeah, I titled this as, how tight is the U.S. labor market? Usually that's kind of obvious, are things, going great? Are they going badly? But it's kind of an unusual period now where it has some aspects of a very tight labor market and some aspects of a somewhat loose labor market. So I kind of wanted to review those things, and I'm hoping in the question and answer period I can get a little commentary from the group about how they actually think about things. All right, so why should you think it might not think it's a very tight labor market? And actually, before I go, I should use the usual disclaimer to sort of note that I'm not speaking for anybody other than myself, and anything I happen to say are my opinions, not those of anybody else at the Federal Reserve. One reason you might think that we aren't in a tight labor market is this picture here, which basically shows what happened to employment, and it just dramatically dropped. I think it was like 22 million jobs in March and April of last year, and it's bounced back substantially, but it's still not anywhere very close to where it was before. So we're, I think more than 6 million jobs below the previous peak, and if you sort of include where we should have been in terms of growth, we're probably maybe 7 or 8 million below where we would like to be. So in that perspective, you can't say that employment is as high as we would like it to be. Also, from the point of view of the unemployment rate, that's still somewhat higher than we would like. This shows what happened, and again, it went, dramatic change. It's, not kinds of things you ever expected to see, but it went from like 3.5 to almost 15, and is down, a little bit over 5 now. But that's still, far from where we would like to be. It's kind of more like back, in 2015 or something like that. So from those two perspectives, employment and unemployment, labor market's not very tight, where it seems like there's some room to actually have some strong growth in order to sort of improve on that. However, if you look at the job openings rate, it's called, which is a separate survey which asks business firms, how many workers are they trying to hire at the moment relative to the size of their employment base, and that rate is at its highest level ever, even by a fairly substantial margin. And what you see is that the job openings rate currently is a little bit above the level of the unemployment rate, which is nothing magical when that happens, but it is a bit unusual. If you look back over the previous 20 years, you don't see very many times except for in 2018 and 2019 when the job openings rate was higher than the unemployment rate. And that reflects the fact that firms, many of the ones we talk to, seem quite desperate to find new workers to sort of take advantage of the opportunities that they have. So this is kind of an unusual situation. I said usually it's kind of clear whether the labor market's tight or loose. So this picture is supposed to illustrate that. This is a scatter plot of the unemployment rate and the job openings rate, or we usually just say the vacancy rate, which is a little quicker. And what you can see is that there are times when things are tight and when they're loose, and usually it's pretty clear tight. That's like at the end of 2019, the unemployment rate is low and the vacancy rate is high. On the other hand, when things are very slack, like back at the end of beginning of 2010, the unemployment rate's high and the vacancy rate is low. And most of the movements that we see over time are kind of these northeast, northwest, southeast movements, sort of along that diagonal. But what we've had now is something quite different, where we're way far away from the data that we're used to seeing, and we're in a situation where you could say that perhaps both the vacancy rate and the unemployment rate are high, that the number of unemployed workers relative to the size of the labor force is somewhat high. It's not ridiculously high, but it's somewhat high. And also, very unusually, the number of vacancies that firms report is high relative to the level of employment. So that's actually an interesting situation, and people often sort of try to, when it happens, kind of try to think through why something like that would happen. And one reason which people were bringing up quite a bit, maybe 6 months ago, was the idea that we have high unemployment and low and high vacancies both because we have a mismatch between the workers who are looking for jobs and the vacancies which are available to those workers. And you can sort of see that would be a problem. Like earlier this year, there were a lot of unemployed workers from the leisure and hospitality sector. Lots of people in restaurants and other similar organizations lost their jobs and are out looking for work. On the other hand, a lot of the openings were in manufacturing industries, where manufacturers kept saying, we want more workers, we have the ability to get them. And if there isn't this match between the people looking for work and the kinds of jobs that they're used to getting in terms of the vacancies, you could have a situation in which you might have what we call structural unemployment, where you'd expect a long period where workers would have to change industries, and that would be low and long. You could be sort of in for a long period of unemployment. But I'll have to say, so I wrote a paper like about 6 months ago, and we said, my co-authors and I said, we don't think that's really what's going on. We don't think that's going to happen because it doesn't really look like workers are making any great effort to sort of change industries. They don't think they need to. And also, it'd be really surprising if leisure and hospitality didn't bounce back in a big way. And in fact, what's happened over those last 6 months or so is the leisure and hospitality has really roared back in many ways. And so this sort of mismatch between unemployment and vacancies that might have existed a bit 6 months ago doesn't really seem like it's a strong phenomenon at the moment. So here's sort of a picture of that. And what this was, we tried to sort of ask the question of at what rate were workers who became unemployed in leisure and hospitality finding their way to manufacturing industries. That's what the blue line is. And you can see that rate is very low. It's like, 1 or 2 or 3%. And it's probably most importantly, it wasn't any different after the recession began than it was before. So there wasn't any unusual tendency for workers to think they needed to change industries. The red line shows workers moving from leisure and hospitality to something other than manufacturing or leisure and hospitality, and the story is sort of the same there. The rates are higher because the industries are bigger, but there's not any big jump. Workers didn't feel like they needed to do something unusual to get themselves out of leisure and hospitality into something else. And in fact, the sort of mismatch that existed, say 6 months ago, between the vacancies and the unemployed has pretty much disappeared. This is one measure of actually, it's more of the positive match of how well they match, and it's defined to be the correlation between the level of vacancy and the level of unemployment when you go across industries. So if the same industries which have a lot of unemployed workers also have a lot of vacancies, and a lot of are those the same, and then conversely, the ones that have a lot of low unemployment also have low vacancies, then the correlation is positive. And what you can see is that, that correlation was, 0.8 before the recession began, and it dropped quite a bit because there was arguably mismatch in terms of who was unemployed versus where the vacancies were. But over the last few months, it's basically gone back. And what's happened essentially is that leisure and hospitality is again trying to hire a lot of people, shows a lot of vacancies, and so things line up much better. So I don't think the problem that we're facing with these sort of high unemployment and high vacancies is really a structural problem that's going to last a long period of time. Instead, it's probably just due to the fact that we had a massive amount of turnover. And when we have a massive amount of turnover, it takes a while for the labor market to sort of find a new equilibrium. People have to search and find new jobs. And that's a lot harder than, when you're already in a situation where most people are employed. You can sort of see that in this picture. It has two parts. Actually, the red line shows the total amount of separation that's happening at a rate, but the blue line in some sense is the more interesting part, which is the rate at which workers are quitting their jobs. And like the job openings rate, this is also at an all-time high, as at least it's been measured over the last 20 years. Workers just are more in this sort of situation more likely to quit their jobs than has been the case in quite a long era, basically ever, according to this measure. You can sort of see there was a period where they weren't quitting at all right after the recession began, and that makes sense. The first 6 months or so of the pandemic were not a good time to go look for a job, so it wasn't a good time to quit your job either. But it's now recovered at this high level, and because of that, there's a lot of workers that are churning through the system. And then I should also note in this picture, I cheated a little bit because there was so much separations that happened right at the time of the pandemic, you wouldn't be able to see anything else. So here's the actual chart for what happened to the level of separations, basically in March and April of 2020. And so there's a lot of people out there still which got themselves disconnected from their old firms, and the search process of getting them back to new jobs, I think is going to take us a little while, but it's heading in a reasonable direction. But in the intermediate time, we're likely to see a period where both unemployment and vacancies are somewhat higher than we were used to seeing. All right, so how do you decide then if we're in a situation where the labor market is tight? Well, one way is to kind of combine the two things, both unemployment and vacancies, and actually to look at the ratio, like how many vacancies are there per unemployed worker. That's in labor economics often called labor market tightness. And there's a picture of that here, and you can see that by this measure, we've come most of the way back in terms of tightness, in terms of the number of vacancies per unemployed worker have gotten to be pretty high. Not quite as high as it was back in 2018 and 19, but fairly high. So in that sense, I would say the labor market has become reasonably tight again. But there's quite a bit of variation across industries. So this is a little hard to read, I suppose, but what it is it's showing separately that tightness measure, December of 2019 before the pandemic, and then June of 2021, relatively recently, most available data for this measure. And it's doing that separately by different industries. And what you see is there's quite a bit of variation. If you looked at the information industry or the arts industries, you would see that it's quite a bit less tight now than it was back in 2019. That's maybe what you would sort of guess. But on the other hand, if you look at manufacturing industries, both say durables and non-durables, it's considerably tighter by this measure now than it was in 2019. So we've really had kind of like different stories in the labor market depending on different industries. And that means that when we talk to different people, we get different stories. In my job, I get to talk to a fairly large number of businessmen. Often the manufacturers are like pulling their hair out saying the labor market's really, really tight, and they think they're doing everything they can to find workers. Other people who sort of work with workers in different places often don't have that opinion. So another topic I wanted to hit was, why hasn't employment really recovered? Unemployment's come most of the way back to where we would like it to be. It's still got more to go, but it's come back pretty far. But yet the first graph I showed you, the total level of employment was, considerably below where we would like it to be and where it was before the pandemic began. And a lot of what's going on there is that workers, many of them dropped out of the labor force, stopped trying to find jobs if they didn't have one, and there was an extremely sharp drop in this what's called the labor force participation rate, and it's only come back about halfway. So it's it's up quite a bit, but and in fact it's also been kind of going sideways the last 6 months, whereas most indicators are improving. So I kind of wanted to sort of touch on maybe some thoughts on what's going on there. And there's a few things, what I said, what happened to the missing workers? Who are these people that aren't participating? And participation rate is dropped by 1.5 percentage points, which is a really huge amount considering how big the population is. And the biggest single piece of that is actually retirements. So there's, given the aging of the U.S. population, it's the number of retired people is growing, but beyond the sort of expected growth in retired people, there was a 2.5 million jump in the number of people who were declaring themselves to be unemployed. Did I say unemployed? I meant to say retired. So 2.5 million more people than expected said they were retired shortly after the pandemic began. And most of those people are in the sort of 60 plus, even 65 plus age category. And it's really a big question about whether they're going to unretire. Retire sounds so final, but it turns out that if you look at the data, many people who say they're retired, you ask them a year later, nope, I have a job. So I think that's going to depend a lot on circumstances. Another big thing that people point to, and I think they think it's a really big deal, and it is an important deal, but it's probably not quite as important deal as most people think, is the disruptions to schools and daycare, that really made it difficult for many parents to work, while taking care of finding a way to take care of their kids. I said that there's maybe 2.5 extra million retired people. My best guess of the number of people who kind of left the labor market because of childcare issues was 200,000, which is a large number, but not nearly as large as the 2.5 million. And why would I say that? Well, we've done analysis which looks at comparing mothers with children to other women who don't have children and sort of seeing how much difference their behavior was. And it turns out that women with children were somewhat more likely to drop out of the labor force than other women, but not that much. And that's why the sort of 200,000 is a reasonable guess. By the way, dads are like no different. In fact, they work slightly more than fathers, than men who aren't fathers. So, there's not really a sort of impact on that. Then there's these other categories which are really hard to sort of get a handle on, but are perhaps potentially important. One is there's a separate survey which asks about people taking care of other than children, and it's quite possible that there's been a big increase of people who are staying home with relatives or spouses or whatever who have issues and really can't be by themselves. And then finally, there's probably a group of people who are just generally afraid of working in the conditions of pandemic. Maybe they have health issues or maybe something else. And we don't have a really good handle on what the size of those other two groups are, but potentially they're fairly substantial. So eventually we're going to see some sort of rebound in those things, and I think a lot remains to be seen exactly how it's going to turn out. The last thing I kind of wanted to get at was wage growth and actually maybe compensation growth, which includes the value of benefits. And this is a graph of the employment cost index, which is a particularly well-constructed measure for today's environment, because what it does is it sort of holds constant the occupational and industry composition of the labor market. Because if you sort of look at what happened to average wages, there's some unusual things you see, because there's a big positive jump in average wages when the pandemic began, because many of the people who were most affected by the pandemic had quite low wages. Taking them out of the sample essentially really raised the average wage, but it wasn't exactly something you would call like a strong wage environment. The employment compensation index removes all those kinds of effects as best it can, and it also focuses on the total value of compensation, not just the wages and salaries, but also benefits and contributions for things like Social Security. And so what do you see from this graph? You see that the ECI growth is as high as it's been, since the Great Recession of 2008 and 9. And in fact, we expect it to sort of, finish the year at a record, over this sort of period. But that's in nominal terms, and I should say it's consistent with the manufacturers I talk to who say they're paying their workers a lot more to get them to come in. On the other hand, if you look at it in inflation-adjusted terms, because inflation has been fairly high over the last year, the sort of compensation growth in real terms across the whole economy has actually been negative. And so I think that sort of sets up a situation where many firms kind of view themselves as having been paying higher and higher wages, but because of the inflationary environment, the workers that they're paying probably aren't getting the full benefits of that. And that sets up a situation where they might want to get some compensation in the future. And then the last graph I have here is of labor share, which is the percentage of national income that gets paid out in terms of compensation to workers. And you can see there's a little bit of a rebound there at the end, but the big thing I wanted you to take away was the last 20 years has been a period where workers have been getting less than their typical share of national income. And so one might think that as labor markets tighten, this could be the time when workers are going to be looking for that kind of a rebound in that, especially since the fact that they actually haven't gotten very strong growth in wages once you account for inflation over the last year. So I guess a slightly controversial takeaway from me would be, hey, people should be sort of expecting to see relatively strong wage growth over the next couple of years to make up for the fact that it hasn't been so strong in real terms recently, and also perhaps somewhat more speculatively to sort of make up for the sort of long period of not workers not getting the greatest share of the pie. So just to sum up, I mean, it's an interesting time in labor markets. I've been watching these numbers for quite a number of years. I can't point to a situation that's exactly like this before. Unemployment's still somewhat high, but the job openings rate is really high. Turnover is especially high, quit rates especially. And then this labor force participation, there's a lot of very interesting questions. Is it going to bounce back? I think it will. But there's really a big question about whether those workers who said they retired, whether they'll just stay retired, in which case it could take several years for the bounce back to happen, or whether when things get better because the COVID is less of an issue and other factors, whether they're going to decide to unretire themselves and look for work. And then again, my last point is I think this could be a situation in which the next couple of years would be one of relatively strong wage growth. So that's what I have, and look forward to any questions you might have at the end.
I get the 2020 Memorial You Were Muted award there. And Dr. Sullivan, thank you so much for going through that. Certainly some interesting points, particularly at the end as it related to wage growth. And I think now would be a good time to remind everyone we will be doing Q&A at the end. I thank those of you who have already put questions in. There is a questions feature in the GoToWebinar app. We would encourage you to use that for any of the panelists today, and we'll run through questions at the end. And again, Dr. Sullivan, thank you so much for that. That was incredibly enlightening. So thank you.
Dr. Sullivan, that always scares me. I once went to a hospital and they paged me as Dr. Sullivan, and everybody thought I was going to do like an operation or something like that, but no, it's.
Well, we're trying to get you a little more work. The labor market's tight, and we want to increase your opportunities. It'll be fine. So with that, following up on Dr. Sullivan's commentary, I want to spend a few minutes talking, not about what's happening at the national level, but what's been happening at the local level, and specifically, some of what we've been seeing here in Will County and in a broader sense in Illinois. And when we talk about sort of the labor market and the workforce market in Will County, we tend to look at it in a couple of different ways. And one of the more common ones that I tend to utilize is just employment here in Will County within our borders. And if we look at employment, just a job standpoint here in Will County, we're quickly approaching our pre-pandemic peak. So Dr. Sullivan had mentioned, nationally, job counts are still way down, and that's true statewide as well. But here in Will County, we've seen a significant bounce back. And frankly, I don't think this should be surprising. In Will County, we've talked frequently about the fact that we've been the top job creating county in Illinois between 2010 and 2020. And we continue to see a lot of momentum and a lot of bounce back in that space. And we'll talk a little bit more about sort of where we're seeing those things. But as you might imagine, our largest industries, transportation, healthcare, continue to sort of lead that bounce back. But we're seeing it in some other interesting places as well. But while the jobs within our borders are quite nearly back, The jobs that are being held by our residents are not. And this is a look at the Will County workforce, if you will, residents of the county. And when we look at our residents, there are far fewer working than there were just a couple of years ago. We're down roughly 25,000 people in that time frame that are working. Statewide, it's closer to 500,000. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I think it's important to sort of draw that parallel when we talk about Will County, the difference between what you're seeing around you and what you're seeing at your business in Will County, maybe versus what we're seeing in some of the region. And the two are definitely not the same. That said, when we talk about this gap, this distance between the number of people in the county who were working 2 years ago and those who are today, I think it's important to think about who these people are. Who's not working, what the change has been, and we've been able to put together a few cross sections of this information that I think are worth noting. One of the big ones, and this has been a narrative, sort of throughout this recession, is that it impacted women more. And what we found is at a state level, this number is actually a lot more even. We're seeing more parity between men and women for job losses at the height of the recession. However, in Will County, the number of employed women fell by a rate that was nearly double that of men. So we've definitely seen from a gender perspective, women have taken more of the brunt of this. And one challenge we have with this bit of information is we don't have the ability to see which of these are voluntary, right? I don't know how many of these people maybe chose to leave the workforce, how many, two-income families in Will County voluntarily became single-income families for reasons of childcare or family care, or whether it's specific to maybe industries that are a bit more heavily weighted to women. It's going to be interesting over time to see how that parses out. But certainly here in Will County, women have been more substantially impacted. Unsurprisingly, young people also much more substantially impacted. When we look at the trough, like previous recessions, young people employment has fallen much, much further than other areas in the county. And again, what I'm measuring here is peak to trough. So 2019, essentially pre-pandemic, and then 2020 at the trough of the pandemic, who were the hardest hit people? Sort of what segments of the population were most negatively impacted? And what we find is this behaves a lot like other recessions in this way. Again, young people certainly took the brunt of this. In addition, when we break this down by race, we find the minority populations that traditionally tend to have highest unemployment during all market times were disproportionately hard hit in this recession. This is a comparison, Illinois in red, Will County in blue. And what we found is Will County outperformed the state across all populations. However, we do see that minority populations, and particularly the Black community in Will County, suffered greater job losses than other populations in the county. The same is true statewide. And this is one of those things that as we get back to work, these are going to be focal point populations for us. And of course, same with education levels. This mirrors other recessions as well. Will County outperformed the state at every education level, less than high school on the left, all the way through to bachelor's or higher on the right. However, again, job losses tended to accumulate most rapidly with lower education levels. And so we look at this and we get this feel for, this looks a lot like the recessions of the past in terms of who it impacted and sort of what's happened. But of course, we know, and Dr. Sullivan touched on a lot of these things, that this was not like a lot of other recessions. And you saw the national openings data. There are more job openings nationally than there have ever been. But we see in Will County, hey, wait a minute, the jobs are kind of back. So are there still that many job openings locally? Sort of what's happening in that space. And what we're finding is, from a hiring standpoint, Will County continues to see a strong increase in job postings through this year. So, we don't have a local job openings number, but we can create a proxy for this through the job postings that we see in the county. And what we've seen is a very strong bounce back from the trough. So Will County employers are definitely out there looking to hire people. in a very meaningful way. We haven't quite hit that peak from 2 summers ago, but we are rapidly approaching it, and we continue to see, in spite of the fact that nearly all the jobs are back in Will County, there's still a lot of emphasis on hiring and a long ways to go. And again, this speaks to labor market tightness, right? Where are we going to find the people? When are people going to re-enter the workforce? As far as looking at where the hiring need is, this is a look at the national number from last month, last month's JOLTS data. We see education and healthcare services is really emphasis on healthcare services, but also trade, transportation, and utilities. I will say retail is embedded in that trade, transportation, utilities numbers, and we've seen bounce back there as well. But really, healthcare and transportation are leading the way nationally. The same is true locally. When we look at the job postings in Will County, transportation jobs are leading the way. This is a look at unique job postings and total job postings, but it's sorted by unique job postings for the last 2 months in Will County. Certainly truck drivers leading the way. That's probably not surprising as we continue to see this emphasis on supply chain and e-commerce. It's reshaping industry in a lot of ways, and we see a lot of emphasis here locally on that. But right behind them, registered nurses, healthcare, and this is, I think, a question I want to ask Dr. Sullivan. The pressure in healthcare has been present for a long time, and we continue to see that persist as we move through this recession and the rehiring. I think, interestingly, though, if you look a little down the list, we see retail salespeople back in the mix, food preparation back in the mix, customer service representatives. So some of these jobs that were really impacted through the recession, really starting to bounce back in a meaningful way here in Will County. So it's exciting to see some of that, gain some momentum and some traction as we go forward. But okay, so we've hired a lot of people in Will County. We continue to try to hire a lot of people in Will County. The question is, can you keep them? We talk about a labor market tightness today, and Dr. Sullivan shared the national quits rate number. I took a look at the Midwest number for the purpose of my presentation. The Midwest quits rate in July 2021, the most recent data, is the highest it's ever been. This is a series high that we measured. So in July, 2.8% of the Midwest labor force quit their jobs. This is a sign of an incredibly confident workforce. These are people who are very confident that they can find work elsewhere. They're leaving their jobs. They're moving to better opportunities. This is important. In the Midwest, 900,000 workers quit last month. Nationally, almost 4,000 workers quit their jobs in July. This is not the workforce of the past. We're seeing a definite change in how workers behave and what they do. And as we look at things like wage pressure, benefits changes, flexibility in the workplace, these are things that are going to impact the ability to retain workers going forward. It's such an incredibly competitive space. And I don't know of a better way to show it than this. You look at the last couple of recessions and the lack of confidence of workers and what's happened here in the last few months. They're wildly different markets. So with that, we know people are leaving jobs. We know people are moving around in jobs, but are people looking for jobs? What's actually happening? And Indeed put together a survey in June that I think is really informative as we look at sort of what's going to happen next. And one thing that I've learned through this recession, and anybody who's heard me talk recently has heard the same thing, I'm done trying to be predictive. I'm going to try to be optimistic at the end of this, but trying to be predictive in this labor market is awfully tough. And as we look at what's been happening here, this is everybody. So this is the entire population, 18 to 64, in the labor market, out of the labor market, who's looking. Only about 10% of the eligible labor force is actively, urgently looking for a job. But a large number of them are at least passively searching. They're out there in market. But if we want to talk about, labor force today, competitiveness for labor, and you really want to be concerned about your workforce, 70% of employed people, employed is in blue on this chart, are looking for jobs, whether passively, actively, or actively and urgently. These people are out there in the market looking around. So it's more important than ever to put an emphasis on retention of your workforce, focus on the people you have, because this is an incredibly active market. That said, particularly among the unemployed, less than 20% are actively and urgently looking. Normally I think we would have an expectation that unemployed persons would be much more likely to be actively and urgently looking. Why aren't they? What's going on? And what we see here are several reasons. COVID being listed as number one, and specifically COVID fears. Spouse employment is number two, and I think again, as we look at that split between men and women in Will County and who's working and who's not, I think we've found that spousal employment is probably something that is strongly supported here locally. Again, it'll be interesting when we get a little better backward-looking view of that data and can split that apart, how much the two-income households in Will County affected the behavior of the labor force. Financial cushion, care responsibilities. Again, Dr. Sullivan talked about this, and Caroline and I have talked about this many times. Care responsibilities, whether it be it child care, family care, has made it very difficult for a lot of people to return back to work. And then UI payments, the continuing UI payments. So with that, we see what people are saying. What are they saying about what will bring them back to work? And so this is a specific look at people who are not searching urgently. What's it going to take to bring them back to work? And this is where I say we can start to think about a little bit of optimism. So I've taken the liberty of checking some of these off, right? After time off this summer, check, we're getting there. I got an email this morning from Starbucks telling me the pumpkin spice is back. We can see the end of summer from where we're standing, right? So we see that moving forward. School in the fall, school is back. Kids are back to school full time. I can't emphasize enough how big of a deal this is. Certainly locally, we talk about this a lot. The return to normalcy and school acting as a place for children to go during the day is very helpful for parents to get back out of the house. Unemployment or savings running out, September 6th, we're sort of at that cliff, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I know we probably have someone more expert on the panel than me, as some states have experimented with winding this back early, but at a national level, it's going to be very interesting to see how that impacts labor force participation going forward. Increased vaccinations. Here in the last couple of days, the Pfizer vaccine finally received FDA approval, and we've begun to see the cascade of vaccine mandates that are associated with that from government organizations, from educational institutions. We're seeing increased vaccination as we speak. And finally, more job opportunities. Like I see the hiring numbers, I see the openings. There are openings out there, and people are out there looking. And so I think we are seeing an increase in job opportunities. There are reasons to be optimistic here. There are reasons to think that people might be returning to the workforce, relatively soon. Not everyone, but large numbers that'll be helpful for you when you look to hire, particularly this fall. And we're beginning to see this already. So as we look at just the Will County labor force, we've seen a bounce here in just the last few months. We've seen a pretty solid bounce in Will County labor force. Again, not back to where we were, but more people in the job market. This is exciting. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not just Will County. As we look around the region, we look at the state as well. The state labor force has picked up since the trough. More than 230,000 people year to date, and nearly 400,000 people since the trough. So we're starting to see people move back into the labor force, even if it's sort of dripping back in. It's important that we begin to see this progress. And of course, when we look at Will County in particular, our labor shed is huge. We tend to think in a local sort of lens as we look at our business and hiring around us. But this is a very complex, diverse, and interactive economy throughout the Chicago region. As we look around our area, nearly 60% of our labor force comes from somewhere else. So many of you who registered today are doing business here in Will County. 60% of your people are coming from somewhere else. 150,000 people come to work every day in Will County from neighboring counties. And frankly, more than 200,000 people leave Will County to go to work. This is normal when we see suburban communities around an urban core like this. You see that interactivity. But bear in mind, particularly as you look for more specialized job roles, this is a wide and active labor market, and there is a lot of sort of attraction potential out there for you. Statewide, nearly 500,000 fewer people are working than there were 2 years ago. We see some of the arrows pointing in the right direction to start bringing people back, but nearly 200,000 of those are right in Will and Cook counties, and in your backyard, in places where we see a lot of connectivity via transportation routes, via public transit. There are opportunities and local people who will be reentering the workforce soon. And my final note on this, for how we go forward, remember your partners. Certainly the Workforce Investment Board, the state of Illinois, and our educational system. Our university system is spectacular, whether be it new graduates, internships, specialized training. I did a faculty meeting last night. We talked a lot about internships for students and where we're going to find them. Use them. These people are out there looking, and we're working towards solutions there. And don't forget your high school system. The high school systems are churning out spectacular kids, targeted programs to your business. And most of them, particularly larger systems, have people in place specifically targeted to talk with you about these programs. So absolutely use those as well. And as I talk about partnerships, this is a good segue to introduce Caroline Portlock. Caroline is the director for the Workforce Investment Board of Will County. Caroline's been here for a little over 4 years and does a great job acting as a conduit between people, employers, the state, and just finding programs and ways to help you work and help you recruit people. And with that, Caroline, again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll let you get started.
Great. Thanks, Doug. So I know all of you are wondering, what in the world is the role of a workforce board? Well, we develop a regional strategic plan, and we set the funding priorities for the area. Essentially, we're your connection to the local public workforce system. This system is a network of federal, state, and local agencies that are committed to economic growth and workforce development. We facilitate partnerships between local businesses with training providers, and we work with the providers to ensure that the training outcomes align with employer needs. Our focus is simple. We are in the business of developing workforce talent that is responsive to the needs of the industry. Dr. Sullivan provided some great information on the national trends, and I know Doug appreciated all of the charts. And not to be outdone, Doug followed up with a set of his own graphics, but that brought the information a little closer to home. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the resources and services that are available to the businesses in Will County through our local provider, the Workforce Services Division of Will County. For recruiting assistance, Workforce Services can help you in finding qualified applicants for your job openings. The online job board allows businesses to post all of their open positions and can be tailored to have the applicants email their resumes directly to you, or they can provide a link to apply to your company website. New job postings are sent out through the news feeds of the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, which are reaching just under 7,000 followers. Workforce Services was hosting these weekly in-person job fairs at the Workforce Center, but of course had to get creative when things shut down in March of 2020. So they did. Along with virtual job fairs utilizing online meeting platform breakout rooms, they started drive-through job fairs throughout the county, utilizing large parking lots and side streets. A drive-through hiring event is a non-contact adaptation of an on-site hiring event where one or several employers offer information about employment opportunities to job seekers who remain in their vehicles for the duration of the event. These events offer a way for employers to connect with candidates and practice social distancing. They also started Job Fair in a Bag. Participants receive a bag containing job listings from Will County businesses and information about programs that the Workforce Center has to offer to aid in job search. Attendees can pick up the bag and go, or they're welcome to stay and use the resource room for job searching or to build their resume. I am also happy to report that we have added back into the mix our in-person job fairs, with one scheduled tomorrow, August 25th from 4 until 6, in partnership with the Village of Romeoville and Romeoville Chamber of Commerce. Next slide. Sometimes a company will find someone who might be a good fit, but they need some technical training in order to be successful. On-the-job training, or OJT, is a training module developed by the business community to train new hires while they work. OJT services promote local business growth by reimbursing businesses for a portion of the new hires' wages during the OJT training period, which can range from 12 weeks to 6 months. OJT is a good option for a variety of industries, including healthcare, information technology, manufacturing, and transportation and logistics. Our partner, Employer Employment Services, can help your company with this program. An E&ES staff can help find great candidates for your company and work with you and the job seeker applicant every step of the way. Next slide. Hiring workers is just the start to building a strong workforce. And Doug referenced the need to be sure we are retaining our current workforce. Continuous training and workforce development keeps your employees on the cutting edge of industry developments. Employees who are competent and on top of changing industry standards help your company hold a position as a leader and a strong competitor within the industry. The Workforce Investment Board of Will County offers training grants to help companies grow and maintain their competitiveness by investing and training in their existing workforce. The purpose of the employee training grants is to support training that will result in a skill attainment for the employee and a process improvement that contributes to the competitiveness and the productivity of a business. Employee training grants are structured to be flexible to meet the business's training objectives. The business creates the training need. They find their trainer. We assist with a grant. Most employers will need to participate with a match, but if you are paying your employees to participate in the training, most often that meets that match requirement. And I will say that if you aren't paying your employees to participate in the training, they're probably not paying attention. Next slide. This region is rich with talent, but we know that sometimes the process to recruit and hire can be complex. So when you need to find talent and grow your company, we can help you navigate the recruitment and hiring process with reliable labor market information and insights into the industry trends. We can help you access talent pools and provide you with additional information on hiring options and incentives. In addition, we have a variety of reports that are regularly updated and available on our website. Our Will County Economic Update gives a snapshot of the employment changes by industry, as well as wage data by occupation. Where the jobs are includes Will County's top 20 occupations most in demand, and the top occupations broken down by industry. We also provide information on the soft skills and hard skills that are noted most often in those job postings. We are constantly updating our unemployment chart, not to be outdone by Pryor. We have our charts available for each county in the Chicago metropolitan region, Illinois, and US. That includes the current month, the last month, and the month comparison 1 year ago. And of course, wage surveys. We're able to assist you in some specialized wage information. If you want to know what someone is hiring for in the industry you're in or the occupation you're interested in recruiting for, we can help you with that. If you want to find out what an occupation that may be a good fit for your company, but isn't necessarily in your industry, if you want to find out what they're hiring for, or even some of the comprehensive compensation packages that are available, we can also assist you with that. All of the reports are designed to help you make better, more informed decisions about your workforce. And of course, all of the information about the programs that I've mentioned is available, and you can contact me, you can go to our website, or you can contact Workforce Services at jobsforpeople.org. And Doug, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And I welcome your chart escalation thing that we've got going. That's excellent. More charts for the people. So with that, again, thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. Thank you to Sean McCarthy as our sponsor today. We've had quite a lot of questions roll in, and I'm going to try to get through a few of these here. A couple on wages to start with, Dr. Sullivan. You know, you mentioned that the way that you're tracking wages is inclusive of both wages and benefits. Are you seeing more of one or the other? Is there one that's sort of leading that?
I think they're both fairly closely in sync. I actually probably should have checked that the exact detail, but it's not like it's all in the wage component. They're both growing. Okay. I do know that the plain wage one is growing at about the same speed as the overall, so it must be that the benefits are also growing about like that.
Gotcha. Okay. And then do you know, is there any information about sort of where the wage increases are taking place? Are we seeing them more at the lower end of the pay scale, the higher end of the pay scale? Is there any information on that?
I think it probably varies a little bit, but there's a sort of a theme that the lower end of the wage scale has been getting bigger percentage increases, you know, for a little while now, and it's you know, that's not how it worked in over the last 20 years on average. But you know, I think there's been a lot of demand for entry-level workers and, you know, workers that, you know, don't have a ton of education, and they've had quite good wage growth recently.
Great, thank you.
Like some of the professional level people are seeming a little bit slower, which is, you know, again, a little bit different than what we're used to seeing.
Yeah, no, but it makes sense in this environment, I think. So, so this question, I'm just going to kind of read this out. Are there any historical precedents where there was simultaneously high U and V? And if yes, were there factors similar to what we're seeing in 2021? So that unemployment vacancy sort
right.
of both being very, very high. Are there historical precedents for that?
Well, like to a much less great extent, the sort of period after the Great Recession from, you know, 2010 to 2018 or 19, if you remember that graph I had, the sort of line was a little bit shifted out, and there were a number of people who were pointing to that, especially at the beginning, and saying, gee, maybe something has happened in the labor market that we're seeing some fundamental shift. And, you know, they worried that wasn't able to sort of fix it, say, with monetary policy. It would require accepting, you know, sort of higher level of unemployment, which at the time I argued against. And I think it turned out that probably some of the problem in that period was the vacancy rates were maybe measured not as well. Firms would say they had a vacancy, even if they didn't put a great deal of effort into trying to fill one. So the vacancy numbers probably looked a little bit better. Maybe some of that's going on now, but I don't get that feel. I get the feel that firms are putting pretty great effort into trying to fill vacancies, and so the numbers probably are pretty meaningful.
Okay, makes sense.
We don't have a long history of having good data on vacancies in the U.S. We didn't really start collecting that carefully until about the year 2000, but there's previous instances in some European countries which had the sort of similar situation where there's a big change in industrial structure, and you had both the high unemployment and high vacancies, and it took a while to sort of get things fixed. And people were worried that was what was happening to the U.S. in the 2010s. But fortunately, that really wasn't what it was. I think it was just the lack of labor demand in general.
Okay. Caroline, one for you. What advice would you give a company struggling to hire in manufacturing roles? It's a company with good retention, but needing to hire due to growth.
I think partnering with some of the community colleges, quite honestly, we've got some apprenticeship programs, pre-apprenticeship programs, and of course then the OJT program, because the more that you can promote the career path that's available in that industry, I think the better off they are. And I think sometimes it goes to the perception that people have of the manufacturing industry. So getting them in and helping them learn the technical skills will certainly help.
Great, thank you for that. I'm going to self-indulge and ask my question. I wrote this down as you were going through. Health industry labor market tightness, it was the highest prior to the pandemic. It's the highest after the pandemic. So I don't know if we can blame it on the pandemic. Is there something systemic about that industry? Why does that persist?
That's a really good question, and so I probably shouldn't do this, but like my thesis way back in the 80s when I wrote a dissertation, one of the chapters was on the market for nurses. And if you ask the American Hospital Association, like over a 50-year period, is there a shortage of nurses? Their answer was, probably 48 out of the 50 years they would say yes. But yet they didn't strongly raise their wage rates during this period. So it was kind of like, are you serious about fixing the shortage or not? So I think to some extent, that's what that could be going on as well. But I think probably in general for healthcare, it's just a growing sector. As we all get older, there's going to be more demand for their services, and I think that's just their growth that probably is a sort of major factor in the fact that they need to keep rising. I mean, most recessions, even when the aggregate employment has fallen, healthcare employment has continued to rise without a beat. That wasn't the case this time, but usually they're immune to sort of well, they're not immune, but they don't suffer as much during recessions.
Okay. No, that's the growth I hadn't thought about. That's an interesting observation, and probably that's a big factor. Caroline, from your end, as you work with people and look at job placement, are you seeing people, changing industries at the local level quite a bit? Dr. Sullivan mentioned maybe there wasn't a lot of pressure in people doing that. Are you seeing that locally, more and more people looking to maybe change job industries?
We have heard a lot of the job seekers who have taken this time to sort of reflect on where they've been and where they want to be. And, any time that you have some higher unemployment due to layoffs, you'll see a higher shift in entrepreneurs, people who are going to start their own businesses, right? So, we do have some of that, but we also have people who say, you know what, this is maybe my opportunity to reinvent what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And whether it's something that you can do and your family structure can support that, or it's something that you say, to heck with it, I'm going to throw caution to the wind. Perhaps that's where some of the additional benefits has helped in allowing people to really reflect on and do that. So we have heard that. We've seen an increase in the number of people who need resumes on transferable skills. So if they were in one industry and they want to try to figure out what skills can be gleaned from that will help them in another industry, we have seen so much of that we now have a workshop on how people can start to articulate that on their resumes.
Makes sense. So I'm going to put two of them together. We have one question asking what the chances are that the unemployment benefits as they are today would be extended, and sort of a follow-up to that. do we have any idea or any concept of how long it might take workers that were utilizing the extended UI to return to work if it's not extended?
Is that one for me?
That one's for you. Yeah.
I'll start,
No
but others may
problem.
have opinion. I mean, others, I'm not like a political scientist, so I don't know what the odds are, but but I actually haven't heard anybody talking about, trying to, seriously push an extension to those benefits. So we're going to find out, what impact they were having. I think personally, it probably is some impact, especially over the last couple or 3 or 4 months, in terms of probably keeping people from looking as hard as they might. But traditionally, those effects on labor supply are there, but they're not huge. Like if you tell people they've got an extra 10 weeks of benefits, on average, that's going to make them take 1 more week to find a job. And similarly, if you sort of raise their replacement rate from 40% to 50%, that might add 1 more week. So I don't think it's going to be dramatic, but I mean, I think there'll probably be a positive impact on, some people, making efforts to find work.
I do think your one chart, though, Doug, did sum it up. I think the fall coming, school going back full time. I think that this next month will really tell where
It's
we're
going
at
to be
with that.
quite exciting because it'll take like a month or 2 to get the actual data for it. But,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, on the schools, I mean, that's why I was trying to make the point was I don't think it's going to be as hugely big as many people do. I mean, my first intuition would be that, there must be something holding people back from working, the sort of difficulties dealing with the schools. But when you compare parents to non-parents, there weren't huge differences in how they behaved. I think probably parents are just sort of dealing with it, and probably very distracting and hard, but for the most part, they stayed working. Maybe this will help them stay working because I don't think they could probably keep it up, the other situation.
We have one question. I'm going to try to tackle this, but I'm open to opinions. When we look at the number of people not working, is it due to retirements or perhaps people leaving the state? I think certainly Dr. Sullivan's retirement number was eye-opening to me. I hadn't seen that 2.5 million. So that's definitely a factor that I don't know how to parse out at the local level yet. I suppose with hindsight, we'll see the people who don't come back, and that will be those who retired or left the state. From a population standpoint, I thought that the 2020 numbers for the Chicago region were maybe a little better than we thought. I mean, you probably heard me talk about Will County outperformed the region. We did pretty well, but the Chicago region as a whole, performed pretty well. And, Illinois is a state where, 90 of our 102 counties plus or minus lost population, but this region performed very, very well. And so I think there's some reason for optimism locally, if not necessarily statewide. And I don't know, if you see anything else, Dr. Sullivan, particularly from the retirement standpoint, but I think that's probably as close as we can say it now.
Actually, I'm trying to do a little more research into this question. So maybe if you have me back in a year or something, I'll have a better answer.
Excellent. I'm really curious about that one myself. So, one last question that we had come in here. So it's a question, what are your thoughts on companies who are, providing higher compensation today as a tool for retention and hiring? I mean, I guess we would have called that efficiency wages in Econ 101, right? But is there a negative impact down the road for that? Or, I mean, do wages just stay elevated? Are there any negatives perhaps to this, compensation rise that we're seeing? And that one's for you, Dr. Sullivan, because that's not an easy one. I don't want to try to answer that.
I think every firm has got to kind of make up their choices about that. I mean, we do, but not just recently, but in general, when I talk to business people, they're very reluctant to sort of lock in high wages because they worry what's going to happen in the future. But I think we're probably, as I was trying to get, this is my I don't usually make as much of a forecast of that, but I do kind of feel like that the wage pressures are going to keep growing, and to get people back into the labor force quickly, that's going to help. But obviously each firm has to kind of make up their mind about what's the reasonable strategy for them. try to find some way to stay flexible. I mean, one response you hear a lot about is there's a lot of lump sum payments or hiring bonuses and things like that, which are an attempt to get people in the door, but not lock the firms in going forward. And a big question is whether that's going to continue or whether there'll be sort of more, sort of normalizing, wage increases that's kind of more in line with a little bit faster growth.
Well, thank you for that. And again, thank you, Dr. Sullivan. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you to everyone who stayed on with us, asked a lot of great questions. And I think there was a lot of information out there that it was, kind of exciting and interesting, and certainly an interesting few months in front of us from a labor market standpoint. This presentation, the video will be up on CED website here in the next day or so. By all means, check it out, send any questions. And thank you so much for joining us and for your support of the CED. And with that, we'll go ahead and exit. Thanks again to everyone, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.